Cakeism was one of the big things that we discussed way back in 2016, and of course, this was the big theory that the Brexiteers were saying, "Oh, don't worry. Not only can we have our cake and eat it, we can still have all the benefits of being in the single market while not being in it and having to follow all these rules." This was the magic promise, of course, that the Leave campaign tried to sell everyone on. And indeed, they sold the whole range of things. Remember, these were the people who said that we could remain indeed in the single market and customs union, and that only a fool would talk about leaving it. And yet, here we are. And we are still in a situation where Northern Ireland, the only part of the UK that is still in the customs union and single market, businesses over there are flourishing compared to many counterparts that they might have in the rest of the country, which again is certainly a very big embarrassment for a lot of the Brexiteers and indeed for Boris Johnson, which is why a lot of people highly suspect his wife Frost, and even now Liz Truss herself, was desperate for all of this last year, indeed, because again, New Year and all, about filming this last year, if that makes sense, were desperate to try and end this, end the protocol, because the more Northern Ireland flourishes as part of economy and the other businesses look and just go, well, hang on, our business will be far better being in Northern Ireland than the UK, it doesn't look as good. And especially, of course, with the whole Freeport idea, which again are not going to work. We've tried this in the past. They didn't work last time. There is no evidence to suggest that they're going to work this time. And indeed, many of the rollover deals that we have signed exclude free ports from many of the trade agreements that many would try and gain access to. So indeed, this is not going to be the massive economic revival that Brexit was promised to be, promised by the Brexiteers. Indeed, it's time for the promises of Brexit to, well, be really put to bed once and for all. We've seen throughout all this year, the promises about Brexit already just a year in have pretty much collapsed. And the more and more they continue and insist that these promises are going to be real, that they're going to be fulfilled, the more and more they look foolish for pushing them. And yet, as we've said before, Brexit is now inexorably tied to the Conservative Party. And when Brexit sinks, so will they too. Indeed, it will be the moderates in the Conservative Party who will once again start to push to rejoin the EU and the EU, the customs union, and the single market. That was what will happen. It's just a matter of time to when they start to be doing it. Of course, 2022, as I've said, is the year where I think a lot of these businesses are now going to start saying, what was the point of Brexit? What is the point of this all? And remember, this has already been asked already in a lot of other, shall we say, pro-Brexit newspapers. So not easily does the Brexiteers lie in bed at sleep at night these days. So anyway, let's jump into The Economist on this exact same issue, because they're talking about this as well. So before we do jump into that, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. So let's jump into this then. Like I say, this comes from The Economist, with the title of Brexit's Many Contradictions Are Coming to a Head. A year ago, as Boris Johnson prepared to take Britain out of the European Union's trade agreements after an 11-month transition, he was on top of the world. The trade and cooperation agreement he had signed with the EU was, he crowed, cakeist, the term for his deal that combined of eating a cake and, in this case, decent access to the single market and freedom to diverge from its rules. But as 2021 has ended, there was little cake to actually be had. A backbench rebellion, a stunning by-election loss, and public anger at revelations that the Prime Minister and his colleagues partied during lockdowns in 2020 have even hit his poll ratings. And this year's final blow came on December the 18th, when David Frost, his chief EU negotiator, resigned, citing his frustration at the government's failure to make any progress on the ambitious post-Brexit agenda. Some of Mr. Johnson's difficulties are tied to his own personal flaws, arrogance and sloppiness, and the belief that rules are for little people. But Lord Frost, of all his bellicose approach to the EU, made progress even harder. and was right about his central charge. On Brexit, which the Conservatives promised would kickstart a national renewal, the government is adrift. Growth has been sluggish, and ejection from the single market has, as expected, harmed the country's prospects. Government forecasters put the long-run hit to the productivity and the GDP around 4% so far. And so far, the government has failed to identify any policies that could come close to making up for that. And to try and retain the momentum, it must make very tough choices and face up to the consequences. The problem is less the type of Brexit that Britain opted for as a refusal to accept what flows from it. That is the clearest in Northern Ireland. Britain chose to maximise sovereignty and national control at the cost of leaving the EU system. And the EU, mindful of Northern Ireland's very fragile peace, offered a special deal whereby the province in effect remains in the single market and customs union, so to avoid the destabilizing hard border with the Republic of Ireland. That meant that there will now be customs checks in the Irish Sea, an outcome spelt out in the treaty that Britain chose to sign, but which Lord Frost has subsequently declared unacceptable and tried fruitlessly to try and unpick. A very similar failure to make a choice and stick to it is very evident in Britain's two vilifications between the opponents of either trying to escape the EU's regulatory pull or staying in a tight orbit around the single market and its rules. The reason is partly electoral. Brexit, for its most ardent salesmen, dreamed of a lighter taxes and a looser regulations, of Britain becoming Singapore on the Thames. But many voters rather like the EU's social democratic model. And indeed, since leaving the EU, Britain has in some ways become more European. It has raised the minimum wage sharply and increased taxes to pay for social care. If Mr. Johnson's promises to level up Britain mean anything, it is its European-style industrial policy and grand public works. A dose of realism is needed. And on Northern Ireland, that means accepting that for the province to be both inside and outside the EU's regulatory alignments is impossible. And moving on, Britain and the EU can then work to minimise the downsides such as the onerous customs checks, and to try and maximise the upsides by helping businesses in one of the UK's poorest regions profit from their privileged access to the EU's giant market. Of course, that they want to diverge from Europe, Britain needs to actually assess the costs and benefits of the decision to move. Often they will mean conducting that bespoke national regulations, no matter how objectively better than the EU ones are. Impractical, pointless, or even impossible to sell to voters, EU regulations on data protection are the de facto global standards. And in the chemical industry, so much of British trade is with the EU that many British firms have to follow the rules to the letter. When it comes to food safety and animal welfare, Britain's like the EU's high animal welfare standards and will oppose any relaxation great enough to boost productivity. In other cases, Britain can diverge away from the EU, and it will, and in a way that will pack a punch. It would be very hard to craft something better than what the EU's wasteful and environmentally damaging common agricultural policy. The competition policy and even state aid rules can also offer opportunities. Nimble regulation, tax policies, and visas can help London thrive as a global financial hub. Not the way it's going, certainly. I'd also definitely dispute his claim there on the EU's wasteful and environmentally damaging common agricultural policy. I definitely dispute that in the article. But of course, taking the cake. Some of them, of course, the biggest boost to growth, however, would come in the form of policies that were even possible within the EU, such as market-driven reforms to the health service and looser planning rules. Again, depending what those are, of course. These will be obviously very hard to sell in the prosperous Tory shires and working class northern constituencies that voted Conservatives in 2019 to, quote, get Brexit done. Mr. Johnson's cake-based campaign made no mentions, of course, of the tough choices. But unless his government starts to make some, Brexit future will hold very little crumbs. And that's it. We're getting to the point now where we have to generally ask, what was the point of Brexit? And that should be asked of every single Tory MP whenever this comes up. What was the point of Brexit? What has actually Brexit done for the UK economy? It's done nothing. It's damaged it long term in the long run, and the Tories have no policies to try and shore up that massive 4% loss in GDP. And remember, 4% might not sound like a big number, but we're talking countries' GDP, where we're talking billions upon billions of pounds here. So 4% might sound like a small number to you and I, but that is like billions and billions of pounds of money that is now gone from our economy. That is a smaller pool for us to now tax from and to pay for things like goods and services that we all very much well expect. And the grand Tory plan for all this is nothing. The Tories have nothing to offer all this. And this is what was always shocking, that Brexit was just a policyless policy. We have these grand ideas that we want to do, but we're not going to talk about them. So just, Brexit will get sovereignty and, we'll level up. But again, not so much. And like I say, the first video of the year, and as I've said, this year, 2022, is going to be very hard for a lot of people and a lot of businesses in a lot of industries throughout this country. 2022 is really going to be an awful year for a whole lot of people. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.